Okay, so hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the TrailBlazers podcast, where we look at the interesting careers of young professionals a couple of years out of their engineering degree and see the different twists and turns and journeys that they're taking that are unique. And today we have another interesting guest on the podcast. So Dave, why don't you tell us who we got on the podcast today?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Tyler, for the intro. It's great as always. So today on the podcast we have Taylor Rault, who's currently a PhD student in Stanford. Pretty decent school, right? School maybe a few of us would like to go to.
Is that
Also,
good?
another ed. Yeah, I think it's a pretty good one. What do you think? It's like a pretty good school, eh? Like maybe
I think
maybe
so.
like a little bit better than the University of Alberta, like something like that. Anyways, yeah, another person from Edmonton, representing Tyler and I's hometown. So yeah, go Taylor. So jokes aside, yeah, Taylor is currently at Stanford doing his PhD. Previously, he was spending time at the University of Toronto doing his master's, and then previous to that, he was at the University of Alberta. And I think a couple of very interesting stories that Taylor talks about is he talks about kind of his journey through his bachelor's and into his master's, and then at the start of his master's, not really thinking he would want to do a PhD, but then him mentioning afterwards, like his master's experience, like really opened that opportunity up for him, and like he really wanted to go to Stanford, and so I think he was talking about for almost like a year and a half to 2 years being in touch with like a mentor at Stanford who was trying to help him with his application and trying to get his information prepped for his application, which is obviously very competitive. And then he shares this awesome story about how he was originally basically left off the admissions list from Stanford. And he had spent like 1.5, 2 years getting prepped for this, did all his publications, every little small detail he possibly could, but he didn't get accepted. And then, you know, he basically went out of his way and like he decided that he wanted to stay in touch like with his mentor that I talked with, and right after he got that like admission notice, like not getting the admission, he basically went to his mentor and then shared this awesome story about how he was like, hey, I did everything I possibly could, like you thought this was competitive, like would you mind taking like a second look? And then the mentor went through everything. He went through like another interview process, and like alas, like fighting adversity, he's now a PhD student at Stanford. So I thought it was an awesome story. Tyler, what do you got to say about Taylor's episode?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It was an awesome story about, all the work, all the prep that he put in to get into the PhD program there at Stanford. And he touched on a lot of other really good things too. If you're looking for a bit of, what's the optimal amount of hours to work every day, he has some good metrics on that. He's tracked his own hours and seen when he's most effective. So if you want to get a really good look into the life of a student in PhD program at Stanford and what that would be like and how you can get there, this is definitely a good episode for you. So without further ado, we will toss it over to Taylor. And just before that, make sure you hit that like button, make sure you subscribe for more content. And yeah, hope you enjoy the interview. But yeah, anyway, Taylor, thanks for coming on the pod and chatting with us today. I think for everybody listening, it'd probably be helpful if you gave kind of a 30,000 foot view, high level overview of kind of where you are now, kind of where you started at the beginning of university, and kind of where you ended up along the way. I know you're in a PhD now, so maybe if you could just take us from start to finish, what you're doing.
Yeah, all right. So I went through, public education in Edmonton, Alberta, and then at the end of high school, I actually was interested in probably going and pursuing a music degree because I was really into being playing in bands, doing music and everything when I was in high school. But then I took high school physics, and I was like, oh, that's awesome. So then, since I was doing well in physics and math, I decided, okay, let's go into engineering. So I started an engineering degree at the University of Alberta, and from there, in first year, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I mean, I was interested in courses, math and physics again. It was my cup of tea. But then it came time to decide which avenue I wanted to pursue, because at U of A you start a general first year, and then in second year you have to specialize. So I'd been interested in cars and just machines in general, kind of my whole life. I remember when I was about 10 years old, my dad gave me a model engine to put together. Like I had like a kind of a plastic model engine to build when I was 10 years old for Christmas. So I was interested in, or I guess we put together this model engine when I was 10 years old. And so I was always interested in machinery, and this kind of sparked an interest in a more in-depth understanding of, okay, how machines actually work. Because like the engine is actually what makes the car go, right? So, it's cool to be interested in cars and everything, but actually understanding what how the technology works is really interesting. So, I guess in first year engineering, I was like, okay, you know what, mechanical engineering is probably the way to go. It also helped that most of my friends were also interested in pursuing mechanical engineering, so like natural choice. So when I just went through that, I was fortunate to get into the co-op program, and from then on, kind of started doing a little bit better in school and realized, okay, maybe grad school is a thing. We probably talk about that more later. And then when it came time to finish up undergrad, I'd had a few different co-op jobs, and I didn't really see myself working in them long term. So, and also midway through undergrad, I realized that, car engines are not just the only thing. There's also jet engines and rockets, and they're all just combustion related. And, that's very, very exciting, particularly with, SpaceX and everything that was really burgeoning during undergrad. So I decided to pursue a master's degree in aerospace engineering, specializing in combustion and propulsion. And so I applied to various schools, and so the one that I ended up getting into was University of Toronto. And the lab I was working in ended up being able to work on soot formation in a model gas turbine combustor, so very directly related to combustion jet engines and just overall aerospace. So the great thing about that master's degree too is we were actually affiliated with Pratt & Whitney Canada, and so my plan was just get the master's degree and then go work at an engine company, Pratt & Whitney Canada. That'd be a really nice, smooth way to transition out of school. And so halfway through the master's, I realized, okay, I think I really like this research kind of thing. So I decided, let's try and pursue a PhD. And around this time as well, one of my professors decided, or he noticed I was doing well on a course, and he knew I was interested in doing more research. So he said, hey, why don't you check out one of these labs at Stanford? Actually, one of the former graduates from University of Toronto is professor there now. And so I looked at the lab, and it wasn't my cup of tea, but then they got me on the website and actually found a lab that I knew exactly, or that was very much in alignment with my interests. And I go, let's do that. So actually positioned myself such that I could give myself the best chance possible to get into Stanford. And lo and behold, the plan worked, and here I am. So now I'm doing a PhD in mechanical engineering at Stanford, and I'm in the high temperature gas dynamics laboratory using shock waves to study chemical kinetics. So basically, you use a shock wave to initiate chemical reactions, because across a shock you get a effectively instantaneous increase in temperature and pressure, which kickstarts reactions. And then what we do is we shoot lasers through these gas phase reactions to measure reactant concentrations as a function of time. And from that, by knowing the reactant concentrations and the temperature and pressure, we can gain insight into the reaction rates, which are then used to inform chemical models, et cetera, that are used to design engines and myriad other things. So that's where I am now. So hopefully that's a good synopsis.
For sure. I think that's like a really nice kind of, like high level view of maybe everything that's gone on in your life to this point. And obviously, like a lot of kind of like bends and twists along the way, which I think is quite exciting. Would you mind maybe almost bringing us back to say, like when you were a bachelor student and you were going and doing your internships at that point in time, was there anything within your internships that like really kind of set the trajectory and helped you sort of realize that you wanted to go and pursue graduate studies, or maybe like a specific area of graduate studies that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, definitely. So, so in my first year of undergrad, I did reasonably well. I guess, okay, I had about a 3.3 GPA, but then in second year, I really, for whatever reason, I ended up doing a lot better. I guess I was more focused and more interested. I ended up having like 3.9 GPA in second year. And so, but due to my first year grades, I don't think as many employers were necessarily as interested in my transcript. And frankly, I also didn't submit cover letters or anything like that. So the first job I got in industry was just at an oil field construction company. And so I was working as a junior mechanical estimator. And frankly, like I was sitting in Excel all day, just looking at drawings and then taking numbers off. And like, okay, you know what, this is not that exciting. And while it was an entry level job, I saw the other people at the company, and it really just like, okay, you know, there's not too much more to this really. Perhaps I was being oversimplistic, but I was like, okay, you know what, I think I want to do something more. And so since I was also doing better in school and I was gaining more interest in what I was learning, the thought started to kind of creep in that I wanted to do a master's degree, just based on, you know, the fact that I didn't really see myself working in that job. So that was kind of when it was brewing. And then in my second co-op term, I was working at Fantech Consulting. And so I was working actually as an industrial co-op student. So looking at, you know, building design and how to optimize, you know, building layouts for more efficiency, so like warehousing and things like that, where you store things to make sure you can pack a truck the most efficient way possible. And so, you know, it was really interesting. And I actually got to use started to learn how to code in VBA and do some, you know, simulations in Excel for kind of optimizing things. But again, I was like, you know what, it's interesting, but I still think that I'm probably more interested in, you know, engines and trying to actually do something really technical with my understanding or with my degree. So also during that work term, I was a little bit bored. There were a few times when, you know, I didn't have that much to do, and I ended up browsing Wikipedia and came across basic fighter maneuvers for, you know, fighter jets. And so I hadn't really, this is at the time when I was just kind of realizing, oh, jet engines are, you know, another piece of mechanical engineering. And so reading that article, just kind of, the coin just kind of dropped, like, oh, aerospace would be awesome. Because, you know, like, flight is just a total amalgamation of all fields of engineering. It's outstanding. There's so much you could do with it. So that was really kind of at the point where it's like, okay, you know, I think doing something in the aerospace field would be ideal. And, you know, of course, the more and more you read about it, the more and more interested you get into it. And so then Elon Musk's book, or Ashley Vance's biography of him and things like that. So that was, I'd say probably around mid 2016 was when it really crystallized that, okay, I want to do a master's in aerospace.
Yeah, that's a good summary of it for sure. I kind of want to go back to the second year when you said that your GPA went from a 3.3 to a 3.9. Was this, I assume this was intentional, and kind of the question I would have is, you know, a lot of students probably realize they're going to need, if they want to pursue graduate degrees like you have, like a master's or a PhD, they're going to need a higher GPA. So say they're in the position you were at the start of second year. Were there some habits that you kind of instilled, or some really tangible things you did that helped your GPA go up? I can't really give advice on that. I was never part of the high grades club, but maybe you can. That'd be probably useful for our listeners. And then on top of that, the difference between that, I would also ask, how much have you noticed the difference in your habits as a student between your undergrad and now as a researcher in your PhD? You know, how much has your approach to learning changed over the years?
Yeah, all right. So I guess starting with first year undergrad, the reason I had the GPA I did was, so my transcript was a total rainbow. I had everything from a C all the way to A pluses. And so it carried over basically from high school, where I only studied the things that I was interested in and only really invested in the things I was interested in. And then it's like, you know what, I don't need those other things. And so case in point, in second year, you remember or second term, there was learning how to use MATLAB. I thought, for whatever reason, naively, like, oh, MATLAB's not important, I'm never going to need this. So I just didn't even go to the lectures, didn't really work on the assignments, basically winged it for the midterm and final. By some miracle, I passed. And so the biggest thing that I changed in second year, for me, was, first of all, the courses were by and large more interesting to me, because in first year I did reasonably well in math and physics anyways. But then in second year, the courses were more interesting, but also I realized, okay, you know what, I just need to actually invest more time in the courses I'm not interested in, because I'm going to be interested in studying the courses that I'm interested in anyways. But I need to just actually dedicate. So for example, do those assignments first. For example, like in first year, I didn't study that much chemistry, which is also funny for where I am now. But in retrospect, I should have actually, you know, done those assignments first, because they actually took more effort. And then it's easier to just, when you're a little bit more tired, to focus on the things that are more in your alley anyways. So that's, I guess, the only advice I can really give there. But yeah, just, I guess, structuring it such that you can set yourself up for success there. And then as far as the change for now that I'm in grad school, the big change that I noticed relative from undergrad to grad school was I started actually tracking my hours and tracking how I spend my time. So when I was working in consulting, in order to get paid, I had to submit my hours at the end of every week. And I didn't really do that during undergrad for school or assignments because you guys have to submit the assignment and then you're done. But in grad school, you have coursework, but you also have research. And so what I started to do was, track my time, and not just the amount of time I was at school, but the actual focused hours and focused time I spent on given things at school. So at the end of every day, I'd kind of break things down into 15-minute increments and say, okay, I spent an hour working on this course, 2 hours in the lab, another 2 hours doing literature review and things like that. And the benefit there I found was that, first of all, if I gave myself a quota of, say, 5 hours a day of focused, productive time, and that's relatively easy to hit, if you actually want to do it. But it's not unattainable by any means. So as long as I was clearing that 5 hour minimum, like, you know what, I'm good, and everything else is just gravy. And then what I could also do is with the data. So let's say in 1 week I worked, say, 35 hours, and then the next week I was super busy in lab, and so then I put in 60, right? Then invariably, whenever I did like a big jump or I worked really, really hard 1 week, the next week was just terrible. So it was about trying to figure out what's the optimal amount that I put in every day and just do that consistently, and then just don't push past that. So I found that somewhere around maybe 6 to 7 like focused, productive hours per day is good and totally sustainable. And then if I stop, and then I can go to the gym or do whatever else with the rest of my day and not have to worry about it. Because like then I don't feel bad that, oh, I'm not in the lab all the time working. I know that if I were to be working, it would actually be worse overall. So it's just, that was, I'd say, a bigger shift, if that makes sense, because it was just a different way of looking at things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, kind of maybe just touching on the first portion of what you were mentioning, say like you would be really focused into the courses that you had interest in and you wanted to do well, and then kind of these ones that are off to the side. Like even in my experience, because I think Taylor, similar to you, like I started off as a lower GPA, and by the time, my bachelor's was ending, was higher, like getting ready for grad school, and then grad school, same thing, is that like you sort of, or at least for me, like I realized after a while, is even the things that you thought weren't as important, like for me is same thing, like the MATLAB in year one was just like, and then, but I realize now is that these things that are sort of adjacent in our skill sets, they actually can come back and like impact some of these other courses that you didn't realize that had like any involvement with that, right? And I think even the same perspective now, like in, say, my current working environment, is that a lot of the things that I thought might have not been as important, they all have an impact and they all influence, say, like the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. So even, some things that can often be overlooked, like communication skills, or say like going and like in an internship, like grabbing coffee with your coworkers or doing something like that, like you don't realize, but like 5 or 10 years down the line, those like very fundamental things that you were doing at those points, they actually have like a very strong impact on some of the skills that you'll develop over the period of time. And then actually, I really like the approach that you're doing too in regards to, say, like tracking your work hours. I think it's very important too. And also the one thing that I sort of like with that aspect that you're mentioning too is you kind of have like a threshold, and you're like, once I hit here, like I feel satisfied, and I don't need to go and continue working, right? Because I think it can almost be like a bit of a fallacy sometimes of that we just go and work 10 hours in a day, but they're not 10 productive hours, right?
Yeah.
Like, so some things that like people utilize, like I used to utilize myself, is like Pomodoro technique. So just like 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, and then you can track how many times you do that in a day, right? And sort of what you're mentioning, Taylor, you hit a point and it's good. And also, I think these are like great advice for anybody listening. So where I think I want to kind of point my next question is maybe, talking a little bit about some of the adversities you might have faced along your journey. And maybe you can describe to us like an example of a time of the adversity that you faced and what you sort of did to overcome that adversity. And what I'll kind of point as like the second question of this would be, do you mind kind of sharing to any students that are in school right now or young professionals any advice on, facing adversity and overcoming them?
All right. So I guess first I'll start off by saying, I really haven't had to deal with very much. I've had a very, very blessed life. I haven't been too many challenges, but when you guys gave me kind of the feeder question before, that's the one thing that I thought about was when I was initially considering grad school and doing research, I knew nobody really or that had done a graduate degree right in my family, and I was just kind of going blind. I didn't really know how to approach it. So what I initially did is in third year, when I was looking at my second co-op term, before I worked for that consulting company, I was actually talking to one of our professors about, his research was interesting. So I said, okay, maybe I could just see if I can work for him for the next 8 months. And so scheduled a meeting with him. And so what ended up happening, he asked for my transcript and my resume. And so I gave him all that information. And so my first year I had 3.3 and the second year I had the 3.9. And so he said, okay, yeah, your second year grades are good. But then your first year grades are holding you back. I would, all the students I have in my lab, I would expect to have, a little bit higher performance. And first of all, I was just floored by that. So if I could get a 3.9 now, then does that not negate what happened in first year? And even 3.3 is not bad. So anyways, that kind of rocked me. And so I didn't actually, based on that conversation too, it just didn't generally go well. So I didn't end up working for him. And then later on in undergrad, I had some other experiences with faculty that were not very good. And so just that, perhaps I didn't seem interested enough, or they just sensed that I was not, the right person for whatever reason. So anyways, I was just kind of steered away from research. And so the only thing that I knew I still wanted to do a master's degree. I was considering doing an MEng. Mm-hmm. But the only thing that really kind of brought me back to research was, thankfully, a good friend of mine, his dad and his uncle both have PhDs in physics. And they said, they said, hey, Taylor, you should really do research, because they had known me for a while. And so they, knew that I was probably well suited for it. So I guess point being, and then ended up getting into grad school and doing research, and I really enjoyed it a lot. Mm-hmm. So I guess point being, I would not necessarily take what your professors and advisors say in undergrad, if they don't know you that well, as gospel, or that they don't necessarily know you. And so if you do really think that something is of your interest, still figure out some way to pursue it. And I think the reason that I didn't jive well with those advisors is because, frankly, the research was not actually truly in my area of interest. And so I don't know if there's people out there that are not that that are struggling with trying to find a research position. I think they have not the great grades or whatever else. That probably doesn't matter as much as actually finding what your interest is, because that was one of the big struggles I had, trying to balance where my interests were and what I wanted to do for grad school.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's a really good point. And just to follow up on that, I know you kind of touched on the point earlier that when you were doing your co-op terms, you knew that you really didn't want to do that as a career. And so that kind of pushed you more towards graduate studies, and you found something you're really interested in. At more of a higher level, what would you say, what type of student are graduate studies for, and what type of student are they not for? Kind of if a student can't find a job, should they go into graduate studies for no other reason and try to find something, or should you be really intrinsically curious about something in order to pursue graduate studies? What case works and what case doesn't?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think interest is just the most important thing. So if there's something that you're really interested in, I don't think it matters actually too much what your grades are. You could probably go and actually pursue that. So for example, there's some guys in the lab I was at University of Toronto who had, say a 3.3, 3.4 GPA that were still just keenly interested in research. So they actually were able to go and do that, pursue it. And then they were able to get a job in industry after, and they're happy with their career choice. But then I'll use another example from my master's. There was one of my lab mates. He's joined the lab, interested in aerospace, but not really sure exactly what he wanted to do. And he got a very tough master's project. It was, I'm glad I didn't get that one. But so that was a tough thing for him. And he kind of, actually about 20 months into the master's program, he ended up quitting because he realized, this is just not for me. And that's not to say that he wasn't interested initially in pursuing a graduate degree. I think he was probably, on the side of it where, he should have gone to grad school. But since he wasn't that keenly interested in combustion, it wasn't really what he ended up wanting to do. Ultimately, him dropping out of the master's program, and actually he then went to do a data science boot camp for 4 months after, and now he's working in data science and is enjoying it much, much more. So I think that was ultimately the better choice for him. And so as far as the students that I would say probably ill-advised to go to grad school, is like if you don't have a job out of undergrad and you're just looking for something to fill your time, I'd say the master's degree is not, or a graduate degree in general is probably not the way to go, because you have to do a lot of literature review and read a lot of papers and things like that are, if you aren't interested in them, it's such an uphill battle. It would just not be enjoyable, first of all. And then if you're not that interested in it, then you're going to end up working in something probably somewhat related to what that is. And so you're kind of setting your career up for something you're not that interested in. And there's some caveat there, like you become interested in things by working on them. But, if you're just trying to fill your time, then it's probably not the way to go.
Yeah, I think, is really like practical advice. And from my end too, I've had the perspective to also see that, Taylor, like with say like friends who went and did like a master's degree right out of bachelor's, who maybe say they opted for that instead of like a job search, or, trying to kind of figure out what their vision or their purpose was. And I can completely agree, because, if you're going to do like a research-based master's, most of the time, at least 2 years, like I think in my case, it was 28 months. So, technically 2.5 years of school, right? Probably similar in your case, if you're going to opt for that, you got to really enjoy what you're going to do, or you need to be like very focused on a specific kind of area that you want to get better at. And I think actually just like a word that comes to mind for say like a process like this is being like very deliberate and kind of like self-reflecting on say like actually what we want to get out of the master's degree before we even do it. And that was usually the advice that I gave to people after I had started my master's degree. Like I was, I think, similar to you, Taylor, like I went into an area that I was keenly interested in. And like, although I had like a difficult project, like, and I had areas that were weak in my system for that project, like I was willing to go and, put in the effort to learn and grow those areas, just because, I knew it was going to go and support some of the areas that I was growing the skill set in. But, if we're going to spend 2+ years doing that, like we got to be inherently quite interested in that. So sorry, go ahead.
The other thing too with that is like when you're applying to grad school, you have to put together all these essays and things like that demonstrating why you're interested. And as far as I understand, the two biggest things for getting you into grad school are reference letters and your statement of intent. Because if you have a reasonable transcript, then ultimately those two things are going to be the kicker. And so getting reference letters demonstrating that you're interested, that's very helpful, first of all. And then your statement of purpose in a way writes itself if you are interested. Whereas, if you're not, you have no idea really where to begin, and it's going to be not that great of a document and probably not necessarily that worth your time at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Perhaps that's overly dogmatic, but
yeah, you're right. And I think like these type of things even translate over into like a job search too, right? Like if you're inherently interested in a job, or you're inherently interested in a company, like the people interviewing you or the people you're meeting with and collaborating with will be able to see that through your passion or through your interest in, that process. And similar with what you're mentioning with like a statement of intent, if you are inherently interested in aerospace, that's going to come through in your statement of intent. So the question I'm interested in now is, people from Edmonton, Alberta, and people from other places, they might think, if you're a PhD student at Stanford, that's probably very demanding for your, life and some of the commitments that you have. So will you mind talking to us a little bit about like your work-life balance, and how has the transition for you been, say, going from a great school like University of Toronto for your master's to Stanford for your PhD?
Yeah. So first of all, it has been a bit of a step up. In my master's degree, I had to take 2 courses per semester for the first 2 semesters, and then after that, it was totally research. And so I was busy. There was more just of a shift in mindset from undergrad. Here, and I guess in Toronto, I was able to, go to the gym 3 times a week, play some tennis, see friends every once in a while. Granted, I was pretty busy trying to get data, but it wasn't. I felt like I was actively pushing myself, and it wasn't necessarily the program that was just making me work really hard. Whereas now at Stanford, they're on the quarter system here, first of all, which instead of 3 semesters in a year, fall, winter, and summer, we have, the spring quarter, summer quarter, fall quarter, and then winter quarter. And so I have to take 3 courses per quarter in the first couple quarters here to meet some requirements. And it seems as though each course is just, a 4-month semester compressed into 3 months. And so first of all, coursework is much, much busier. And then my advisor, thankfully the PhD program here is fully funded. So like my tuition's paid for, I have a stipend, and my professor covers overhead, but
Nice.
it's a very significant chunk of money. And so my advisor, like, it costs me this much per year to have you on, you got to toe the line. And so the expectation for how much research needs to get done, there's a decent amount of pressure. So as far as my work-life balance goes, I probably, in my master's, I was averaging about 35, say, productive hours a week. Whereas now I've added at least 10 hours to that. So
Wow.
I'm probably about 45 hours a week on average. And then during midterms, it was a little higher, and finals a little higher, same as you'd expect. So I don't think my work-life balance is the best right now, frankly. I'm still going to the gym 3 days a week, but I've had to cut out playing tennis because first of all, the physical fatigue, and then just scheduling it doesn't really work. I've been trying to go for beers, meet people once every 2 weeks, but it's only once every couple Saturdays. And then on every Saturday, I've been typically working on homework all day. And so I wouldn't really say I have the best work-life balance, but I know this is somewhat temporary given the fact that I'm still in courses. So later, once I'm done this and I've passed my qualifying exams, I anticipate that it'll be more reasonable that I can just, get into a rhythm and do, a typical, let's say, 35 to 40 hour productive work week, and then really just actually set up a life here and have a bit more work-life balance. Whereas right now it's just kind of go. So that answers your question.
For sure.
I think that's a good way to look at it too. And that's kind of always how I understood it as well with the busy times in your life is you got to know like your baseline. Like if your life is you're running a marathon, you got to have a sustainable pace that's, at a pretty decent level. Like you say, 35 hours, those 6-7 productive hours a day. And then accept that there's going to be times where you're sprinting kind of, but as long as you can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, it makes it easier to get through those points. And you got to kind of like have the capacity to do that. Right. So, and just accept that they're going to come. So I think the way you're approaching it seems like a really reasonable way to do it because it's going to come back to that baseline eventually. In terms of work-life balance, we heard that you are a private pilot, in fact. And so recently got that. So I'm actually kind of curious, obviously you probably did that for enjoyment. Seems like a really cool thing to do, but has that impacted the way you look at your work and your research in mechanical engineering and combustion engines?
Yeah, so you can kind of expect that, when I went to the fighter pilot thing back in 2016, I read that article and I was like, okay, I think flight is something that's pretty cool. That kind of was the catalyst. And so I definitely did it just out of personal interest. But it's been really cool actually to see, it ties a whole bunch of things together. So, when you think about, safety factors and designing for redundancy and how you want to really just not be operating at the limit, but, have some buffer, that's very much the case in aviation. You never want to you don't want to have any risks or anything. And so it seems, first of all, it ties that side of engineering together for me, but then it's cool to see, you have all these mechanical systems, you have, structures, you have your engine and airframe, airfoil design, cockpit management, like everything in aviation is engineering, right? So it's been pretty cool to have that all tied together. And likewise, in my fluid mechanics course, for example, this quarter, the prof asked, okay, why do wings have a variable sweep angle going, or variable angle of attack along the length of the wing? And so, thankfully, for my private pilot license, I know that you want to have your stall initiated at the root of the wing so that you maintain control over your ailerons. So there's been interesting, crossovers that I didn't expect my private pilot license to, inform anything I was doing in grad school, but it actually has, in a couple instances, come back the other way. But I guess that if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. Thank you. It seems like there's some tangible relationships between the two, which has been pretty useful for you. I had one more question because I'm kind of curious. We haven't had, I don't believe, any guests that have gone to such a storied university that you're at right now. I'm kind of wondering, have you noticed some difference between, and not to knock U of A or anything like that, but we come from small town Edmonton, go to the U of A, and now you're at Stanford down in Silicon Valley. What are the major things you've noticed, and some similarities, I guess, between the two institutions that you would speak to? That's kind of like maybe makes it more of a cool experience or a fun experience being there.
Yeah. So first of all, I'd say that the top students here are no different really than the top students at U of A. Like I know you guys interviewed Meow. She's evidently brilliant, and so there are many people in my lab and department that are like that. I would say that just in general, though, there's just a larger number of those people, a higher percentage. Like you just tell that everyone's kind of turned on, and so the thing that's most palpable from that is that there's just this little bit of pressure to perform, and it's that good pressure where it's like, okay, I don't feel like my job is at stake or anything if I don't perform, but everyone is at a level and everyone's trying to do really well, and so you want to be at that level, and so that's the really big thing that I've noticed here. Whereas, no knock to U of A, but a lot of people were there just to get a degree and get a job, and they're goofing off in lectures. Aren't that interested in necessarily seeing what you're capable of. Whereas the vast majority of people here are really just interested. Okay, like let's see what we can get out of this. How well can we do, and what can we learn? So that's I'd say probably the biggest difference and the most enjoyable difference that I've found.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, kind of like what you're mentioning is sort of, it's nice to be put in those environments where there's maybe a little bit more of natural pressure to perform. Like, I think as long as you enjoy like having that little bit of pressure on your back, like, it's always going to kind of give you a good outcome because you're probably going to learn and maybe overcome some challenges in your studies a little bit faster. Maybe one of the last questions that I have going forward is, do you have kind of any thoughts on, say, some of the habits or hobbies that you did, or maybe not habits, let's just say hobbies, like any of the hobbies that you did, say like either in high school, university, like, and having kind of like quite a large impact on maybe say like your learning ability for certain things within your master's, your bachelor's, and your PhD? Because I'm sure, like say like a lot of the things that you're picking up now are probably quite unique and new compared to some of the things that you did beforehand. So I'm just wondering if you see any sort of relationship between some of the learning and your hobbies to your current studies.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. The hobbies I had in undergrad were I was mostly playing music outside of school, and so frankly, I don't really think that translates too much into what I'm doing now. It's interesting because you hear there's a lot of people down here that we're in student groups working on things like EcoCar and student engineering projects in undergrad, and they evidently have a lot of transferable skills because they're much more able to work on things and know how to do things hands-on in the lab, just troubleshoot. So I don't really have those things, but I don't think it's necessarily to my detriment because then I'm able to still learn from my lab mates. But I wouldn't really say that I have too many transferable hobbies other than perhaps flying, but that was a very, very recent addition to my life.
Interesting. Nice. No, that's a good one. And I think maybe one of the last things that I want to end on here is, you're going to be done your PhD in due time here. What's next for you after you get the PhD? Where do you want to work? What do you want to do? I'm sorry if I'm asking an existential question here that you don't know the answer to yet, but it'd be nice to know what you plan on doing.
Yeah. So good question. I had to answer it numerous times in my PhD interviews. So it's tough as a Canadian and working in the field I'm in the United States because we're just in general. So I'm in aerospace specifically related to propulsion, high temperature gas dynamics. So a lot of that just right from the get-go is like rockets, jet engines, and those things are very much related to the military. So in fact, there's actually international traffic in arms regulations, ITAR restrictions that are imposed. So I can't work without a U.S. citizenship. I can't work at Pratt & Whitney in the United States or at SpaceX or anything like that. Like, so right there, my hands are tied a little bit. So what I plan to do following the PhD, ideally would be to work at a company like that. But I think more realistically, I'm going to have to work in research at a national lab or something, continuing on perhaps just doing more fundamental science like I am right now, just looking at fundamental reaction rates, or potentially my research is actually on fuel chemistry at the moment. And so our lab is sponsored by and has contracts with various oil and energy companies. And so there's potential that I could end up working as a research scientist at one of those companies, and perhaps even try to climb the ladder there and become more of a senior researcher or what have you at one of those companies. But realistically, initially, it looks like I'm probably going to be still stuck in the lab and doing research as we go forward.
Well, I would say listening to your story today, whatever lab ends up having you as a researcher there is going to be incredibly lucky. So,
very flattering.
Yeah. I would say, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today, sharing your story. All the listeners are going to get a lot out of this. You gave a look into what it's like being a PhD student at Stanford and how you got there. I know a lot of people are interested in that. So thank you for sharing everything, and best of luck to you in the future.
And thanks a lot for having me on, guys. It was enjoyable.
Yeah, thank you, Taylor. Really looking forward to, kind of continuing up with you over the years, and best of luck with your candidacy for your PhD and also the rest of your PhD program too going down the line.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, you guys.
So thanks everybody for listening to Taylor's episode. If you made it this far, hope you really enjoyed hearing his perspective about what it's been like being a master's student at U of T and then as well a PhD student at Stanford. Tyler, what's kind of your thoughts on Taylor's episodes, and what were some of the things that really stuck out to you?
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. It gave me definitely a good view into the life of that PhD life at Stanford. And I really appreciated how, one of the things he touched on about him tracking his hours and when he was most effective throughout the week, how many hours he could put into a week. He tracked it when he went into kind of a crunch mode some weeks, when he put in a lot of hours, and then he saw that his effectiveness dropped right off in the week following. And so he kind of knows that his sweet spot is around, he said, I think around 7 hours a day for the week to get that optimal workload in. So it's kind of cool that he tracked that and has his baseline that's getting pretty scientific about it. So I like that. He has to push a little bit right now, but that just comes with the territory of being a PhD student at Stanford. And then speaking of that, he kind of spoke a little bit about the differences between the environment at Stanford and a school like the U of A. So I thought that was kind of interesting to hear as well. But overall, really good information, lots of really actionable tips for if you want to take that path and you want to go do that, and that's a goal of yours in the future. First of all, is it for you? Because that's what it would be like. And then how you can actually attain that. So no, I thought it was really good. Really enjoyed it. Great interview with Taylor. What were your thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, pretty much. I think what you're sort of sharing, Tyler, is pretty similar to what I'm thinking too. It's good to sort of see that perspective. If you were curious about say doing a master's or doing a PhD and you wanted to get it done, it's interesting to see Taylor's perspective and how many hours a day he's putting into doing his prep work and his his research papers and whatnot. And we've had a couple other guests on the show who've also done masters and have also kind of talked about the grind, but everybody's perspective is a little bit different, right? So I think it's just nice to add another kind of different perspective in into the mix, and then kind of see from Taylor's point of view versus some of the other guests we've had Rault, how they view work-life balance, how they view their prep work and whatnot. So I think it's a good perspective to see Taylor's information in on this as well too. And yeah, I hope you guys really enjoyed it. So with that being said, if you're still here at this point, make sure to hammer that like button, give a little subscribe. If you're feeling really, really good, you can comment. You can always comment, say how much, you're enjoying the podcast and all the content on here. And hoping everybody's going to have a good 2022, and we'll see you guys again soon.
See you next time, guys. Have a good one.